Hey guys, welcome to the Kim Iversen Show. Thank you so much for being here. Just a reminder that if you have been complaining about the commercials, because a lot of you guys have been complaining and emailing me about the commercials, I just want to get it right out of the way before we jump into a really interesting conversation that we're going to be having tonight. But there's two ways for you to get rid of these commercials that you guys are complaining about. A lot of emails saying every 7 minutes there's a commercial that interrupts the show. You can either watch the show live when it streams at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, or you can pay the $9.99 to Rumble and unlock Rumble Premium, which will get rid of the ads on not only this show, but every show you watch on Rumble. So those are the two ways. I know it's been really frustrating. Many of you have been emailing. My own dad has been like, I'm not going to watch anymore if I keep getting these ad interruptions. So I get it. I understand the frustration. But there's, again, two ways to get rid of those advertisements. Either catch the show live when it live streams 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, or pay the premium. Otherwise, the commercials are how Rumble stays afloat. And this is a free speech platform where we're able to have the conversations that really matter rather than being censored and silenced like we are so many other places. And you know how Rumble has been under attack. Commercial advertisers have been pulling out saying, we don't want to advertise on your platform because you host conspiracy theorists and, people who are just, that's a badge of honor when you're finally called a conspiracy theorist. That means you're probably telling the truth. You're a real truth teller. But they don't like that. So they've been at war with the advertising cartel. So I just want to put that out there before we go on to tonight's amazing conversation. Okay. I'm going to bring on the guest right now. This is Mark Gober. Mark, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Kim.
Okay, I have a viewer of the show who watches regularly, and he emailed me and said, you've got to have a conversation with Mark Gober. And so I looked into you and I was like, okay, I'm always interested in finding new people. And I feel like, you're a man of my own heart, of somebody, of like my animal spirit in a way. I always say to people, question everything. That has been my guiding ethos since I started this show back in 2019. Question everything. And I question everything. And you take it to a whole nother level of questioning absolutely everything. I want to go over, first of all, who you are and all of the books that you've written. And you pump these books out at rapid rate. I don't know how you do this. And then we're going to get into a plethora of, I don't even know where this conversation is going to go. So that's why normally I do this big lead in and I tell everybody what we're going to talk about. But I'm like, I have no clue where this conversation is going because this is going to be a good one. And we could talk about so many different things. First of all, we'll go with your background. So you graduated from Princeton University, magna cum laude. So you're a smart dude, right? And you did a thesis on, what was your thesis on that you did there?
It was on prospect theory. Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, he's a Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist.
Okay. You have since, and then what did you do after you graduated from Princeton?
I worked in investment banking in New York, and this was in 2008 at UBS, one of the big investment banks globally. And so during the financial crisis, that was my introduction to the world out of college.
Wow. Okay. So you decided to not make millions of dollars doing that and going into and you instead decided to question everything and write books about questioning everything instead.
Well,
go ahead.
I left New York in 2010 and joined a firm based in Silicon Valley. First, I was in Boston, but the majority of my time was in Silicon Valley. And I was advising technology-focused companies, specifically on their intellectual property as it relates to their business strategy. So I was in that world for another 10 years and became a partner at that firm. And it was while I was at the firm that I started to question things. I eventually left, but I spent a good amount of time in the more normal world.
What made you start questioning everything let me first just rattle off the books that you've written so people understand to the level that you're questioning things. All right. So you wrote An End to Upside Down Thinking, which is about questioning. I mean, that seems like to be just the precursor of questioning everything. An End to Upside Down Thinking. Like we're taught all of these things and we're forced to we are forced to take things at face value, things that they tell us, we're just supposed to believe it. And if we question it, we're called conspiracy theorists or how could you? So tell us about what upside down thinking is and an end to it.
Yes. So this was the first book, and this was based on the initial research I was doing, starting in 2016 while I was still working in Silicon Valley. And the upside down thinking I was referring to is about the basic nature of reality. So it pertains to the nature of consciousness, which is
Mm,
our sense of experiencing life. So we all have consciousness right now. It's the part of us that experiences. It's very difficult to define because I can't point to it, Kim. I can't draw it out for you and say this is your
right.
consciousness. But there are a lot of different theories on what consciousness is, specifically that it comes from our brain and that when our brain shuts off when we die, that's the end of our consciousness. I started to question that, and it led to very big questions about what's a human being, what's the nature of reality. And when I wrote the book, Kim, I thought that was it. I didn't think I was going to be writing more. But it turns out that upside down thinking relates to so many other areas, whether it's politics, medicine, and other things. So I've ended up combining that theme from the first book into many other topics.
Yeah. So An End to Upside Down Thinking is more of a philosophical book, would you say? Like it's based
I,
on, this is like philosophical questions. These are philosophical questions.
Philosophical questions, and that book in particular was science based. So it was looking at scientific evidence to arrive at philosophical answers.
Right. Well, I mean, philosophy, a lot of people think it's just abstract stuff, but it's actually a lot of it is based on science and incorporates science to get to those, but to then explore the greater meaning or the implications of certain things. I have my degree in philosophy, so and I, in particular, and this is why when I started researching you, I was like, oh, I can't wait to have this conversation because was what I found the most fascinating. And I was a big fan of Descartes. I believed that I think, therefore I am. And that has been that has been one of the guiding, I think, phrases that I've used as I've made ethical decisions, or ethic or morality, with various different topics, like, you know, pulling the plug on somebody in a vegetative state, or even abortion, or, there's like a lot of things. I think, therefore I am. So I believe that consciousness is life. That now, what is consciousness is a good question, and that's what you say you explore
Mhm.
in An End to Upside Down Thinking.
Yes.
Okay, then you went on and you wrote An End to Upside Down Living. Is that right? Is that the next one? And what's
Correct.
upside down living?
It ties in with the first book, Upside Down Thinking, in that the philosophical questions I explored in An End to Upside Down Thinking, I didn't talk as much about what it means for how you think about approaching life. There was a little bit of that, but a lot of people said to me, great, Mark, there's a lot of good science here. I'm thinking about life differently. Now, what do I do?
Mhm.
So it was about that process, and it was partially autobiographical, my own journey, because I had such a big shift starting in 2016, but then also looking at ancient wisdom. Spiritual awakening is a topic that comes up, and basically a compass for thinking about living life that aligns with the nature of reality.
Okay, and then you went on, and what's the next one? An End to Upside Down Contact? Is that the next one?
An End to Upside Down Liberty is the
Oh,
third.
Liberty. Okay, hold on. I don't have that. Oh, there it is. Okay. An End to, these were written so quickly. I mean, first of all, The End to Upside Down Thinking came out in 2018. Then in 2020, An End to Upside Down Living. Then 2021, An End to Upside Down Liberty. How big are these books?
They're all between, let's say, 150 and 250 pages roughly. And I should
Okay.
add, so the first book I wrote while I was still working at my firm, but I left my firm right before everything happened with COVID in early 2020, late 2019. And that's when I've written the last 6. So there's 7 total. So I've just been in this phase of researching and writing. And when I learn about a topic that interests me, I go all in, basically.
I suppose so. So what is The End to Upside Down Liberty?
So this book combines the philosophical questions about consciousness and the nature of reality with more traditional political and economic theory to try to answer the question, how should we structure society?
Hmm.
And how can we do that to align with natural law? So I end up in a place of challenging statism, which is the conventional way that we do government around the world.
Right.
And so it ends up in a very libertarian perspective. Some would call it voluntarism, anarcho-capitalism. The Austrian School of Economics is something I talk about in that book too.
Interesting. Okay. And then An End to Upside Down Contact. This is where things get, I think, really interesting than the next set of books here. Okay. What's that?
That is about contact with non-human intelligence, whether we call them aliens, spirits, angels. These are phenomena that have been talked about throughout human history. and in the modern era too. So I explore it not just from a physical sense, because right now there's a lot of talk, even in political circles, about UFOs or
Yeah.
UAPs as they're called, these physical crafts in the sky. But a lot of the phenomena regarding contact also deal with the realm of consciousness, something interdimensional. So I explore all the evidence, kind of survey historically in contemporary times, what's the evidence that there is contact? And I do think there is contact. It's just very complex.
And that's dealing with aliens all the way to ghost. So it's like in spiritual, any sort of other contact is what that one's about.
Exactly.
Okay. And then an end to upside down reset. So this is about the Great Reset, right?
Exactly. I critique the Great Reset, which is not a conspiracy theory. It was a book written by Klaus Schwab and Thierry Malloret in 2020 called COVID-19, The Great Reset, and it lays out a vision for society.
Yeah, you will own nothing and you will be happy, is what they say. And then you have an end to upside down cosmos. And this is your latest one that you just released this year. And this is
Well,
about the
there's one
universe.
more.
Oh, there's one more. What did I skip?
Yes, an end to upside down medicine. That
Oh,
was the
that's right.
sixth
You
one that came out
released
in.
also in 2023, two in 2023. So that's why I didn't see that. I wasn't expecting another one that year. Okay. So an end to upside down medicine. Okay. This one, I think a lot of people, especially watching this show, would understand. This is like what we went through with the COVID pandemic, I would imagine.
COVID pandemic, but more broadly exploring what are the determinants of health and disease, and exploring the germ theory of disease, the questions about viruses people have been asking, and then also incorporating consciousness into health, because there are many miracle healings, we say miracle, that don't match the allopathic assumptions, where people can spontaneously heal, and it's not always a physical thing.
And then an end to upside down cosmos, which is your latest one, which is questioning what? The universe.
Where we live, where are we? That's basically it. What are the lights in the sky? Is the cosmological model true that we've been told there was a Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago? We're part of this big expanding universe. Earth is a little insignificant speck in a massive vacuum. What's the shape of Earth even? What are people claiming on all sides of the debate? I try to lay it out. And I would say where I come out is that the current cosmological model is deeply flawed in many ways. I don't have an exact answer for what is true, but it's flawed in terms of what we're told.
Okay, so what's interesting about all of these books, and this is kind of this is the lead into then the conversation we're going to have. What's the interesting thing about all of these is you're exploring a variety of different topics, from consciousness, which is extremely abstract. You know, people, that's a very abstract concept, but we all know we have consciousness. We all understand the basic of consciousness. We're conscious. I'm a conscious being, I think. There's always a possibility I'm not, I suppose. And I think I am. That's getting into real deep philosophy stuff. But then you're questioning the government's boundaries, borders, lines, authority. You're questioning the Great Reset, Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum. You're questioning medicine, viruses, and things like cancer, right? Do you get into that in the book? Like, what is cancer, and I don't know if you get into that, but I know that there was a synopsis I read where you get into, bacteria, and is bacteria, like a bacterial infection, something that is happening to us, or is it happening for us, right? Like,
Yeah.
to protect us. A lot of people think that. I've heard, not a lot of people, I should say, but I've heard people mentioning that about cancer, saying that cancer is actually a symptom of, it's not the disease, it's the symptom of the disease. Like, it's there to, it's
Yeah.
like a protective, like, this is happening to you. Your body's reacting to try to get rid of something else, or it's reacting to something that you're doing to it, poisoning it in some way.
Yeah, I don't go into cancer too much specifically, but
Okay.
that principle you just described is a common theme in the book, that perhaps we have, depending on what you want to call it, a detoxification system, a system in which we heal. And sometimes, especially from a perspective called German New Medicine, depending on the condition, the symptoms of disease that we call disease are actually part of the healing. So they occur after the conflict has been resolved, the psychological conflict in that case. But the point is that the way we look at things from an allopathic perspective of, you have a symptom, let's just put a Band-Aid on it and not really get to the root cause. That's what I'm focused on more than anything.
So you're questioning all of these various different things, but I think the thing, and now when it comes to even the end to upside down contact, and now we're even having government meetings about, they're holding government hearings about aliens and UFOs and, stuff that, oh, this was big conspiracy theorist and you're just crazy and you need to go to a mental institution if you talk about UFOs and aliens. That's how it had been for so long, but now we're having actual government meetings where they're uncovering and say, well, okay, we've had these programs for a while and yeah, we've seen some things. And, now it's more mainstream to talk about UFOs and it's okay. And you're not called a conspiracy theorist. What I find the most interesting about all of these different things that you explore in these books, the most controversial, in my view, you could tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, but the most controversial is probably the latest book that you've just written about the cosmos. We know the least about the universe. We know the least about the universe, yet it is the most controversial to question, it seems. You are called a flat earther, a moon landing denier, right? I mean, this is where it seems like if you start questioning NASA, if you start questioning the science of space, suddenly that's where people will really call you a whack.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with you. I do think this is the most well, the book just came out, so we'll see how people react. This was not a topic I talked about much before, and it wasn't even one that I looked into much, but so many people were coming up to me, and especially after I wrote the book on medicine, because they said that many of the logical fallacies that are used in the study of alleged viruses are logical fallacies that apply to cosmology. Essentially, where people come to a causal model explaining why things happen based on observations, and they get locked into one model, whereas there are many other possible explanations. So that theme, right. Many people said, Mark, you've got to look at the cosmology. And then I realized, wow, there are parallels here. And it's super important because it's about where we live and what is the context in which we are all living in the society. It's a pretty big deal if we've got it very wrong. And I think we do.
Right. Okay. I'm going to take a break for this sponsor real quick, and then we're going to get more into this. But I wanted to kind of set up this precursor and go through all of your books because I didn't want to just get into the cosmos and flat earth and moon landing and people to think that that's what you really talk about, because that isn't. This is just one of the many things. But I think what you mostly are is you're exploring ideas. Do you get compared to like Sam Harris ever, or that kind of grouping of people that are questioning, that are scientist based, but they're questioning things from more of a philosophical perspective? Do you get that ever? Or is that just me?
I have not gotten that.
Okay.
I have not gotten that yet.
Well, I mean, he's not like the best. I mean, there's a lot, I don't agree with him on a lot of things these days, especially, but still it's that same category, I want to say, of a science-based looking at things, looking at the evidence, and then questioning, what are they trying to teach us with this? What is the reality of this? Is there some, just questioning that, I think, is kind of the realm that you're in. And I think that's really, really fascinating. Okay, quick break for this sponsor. Well, let's talk about getting back to basics, real strength and vitality. Naked Organs by Rumble is designed for men who demand more from their supplements. It's packed with nutrient-rich bison organs, delivering key vitamins like B12 and D, plus minerals and CoQ10. These ingredients naturally boost energy. They support testosterone, enhance muscle recovery, and sharpen mental clarity. No fillers, no additives, no preservatives, just pure bison organs to keep you performing at your best. And while you're there, check out Sleep Naked, the sleep supplement designed to help men recover overnight and wake up ready to feel and be your best. So visit BeNaked.com and save 15% when you use code Kim. Again, that is BeNaked.com. Use code Kim to save 15% off. Okay, where should we begin, Mark? I want to talk about the cosmos. There's so much other stuff. You talk about so much other stuff, but I want to talk about the cosmos, the end to the upside down cosmos, and get into, I am just going to put it out there. I am not convinced we landed on the moon. I'm not convinced. So I get called a moon landing denier by anybody who, I don't ever say that out loud much because people attack. It's the one subject that people will really come after you over. But they put all of the, and this is, I don't want to talk about the moon landing necessarily because there's so much to talk about with the universe, but this is just a showcasing of what they try to tell us when it comes to the universe, right? Where they fed us this story and then it's, they're like, yeah, we landed, we put people on the moon. Oh, but we just so happened to never go back, really, right after these 3 years during the space race. We just so happened to lose the tapes. That to me is like the biggest red flag. Oh, you don't have the tapes anymore. So you have no data, no telemetry data. It's all gone. You don't have the original video. You don't have any of this. They also say, oh, and then there was that scandal where the astronauts, the Apollo 11 astronauts went and gave moon rocks, as like token gifts, and they gave it to, and then the Netherlands, I think they gave it to the Netherlands, was one of the many, which many of the, now, I mean, you'd think if you received as like if you're an ambassador and you received a moon rock from one of the Apollo 11 guys, you would think that your country would house this in like a glass case, like in a glass case, like in the embassy or something. Many of them have lost them. You go around asking, where's the moon rock that you were given by Apollo 11? They're like, nah, we don't have it anymore. But then the Netherlands were like, well, we had it. But then when we tested it, we found out it wasn't a moon rock. It was like from somewhere, on here on Earth. So it's like really difficult to believe. So what's going on with the universe and everything that we've been taught?
Yeah, it's interesting you started with NASA and space exploration. Excuse me, because I think that's where most people go initially. But think about it in the course of human history. For a long time, we didn't have space exploration. It's only been the last under 100 years. And people did have very strong beliefs about the cosmos. But I do think it's natural to ask those questions. And the telemetry tapes, the fact that they don't exist anymore. And in my book, I quote NASA admitting this. That's a big deal. And there are just so many anomalies there. But what I try to do in the book, actually, I don't talk about that until chapter 6, because I think attacking some of the basic physics is really important, because people, I found, get locked into a model because of physics that they don't even know that they're relying on. And I just want to describe a little chain of events that to me is a house of cards that should make everyone question the cosmos. And it starts with Newton's gravity, very basic stuff, where if you drop an apple, it falls to the ground. And the belief is that it falls to the ground because the Earth has a big mass. And mass attracts mass, and the mass of the apple is less than the mass of the Earth, so it falls down. The question isn't whether the apple falls. We know it does. The question is mass attracting mass? So the model from Newton was that mass attracts mass. The problem is that it doesn't always work. So Newton's gravity cannot predict, for example, Mercury's orbit around the sun. So that's a pretty big deal, that it's got some big holes, that it's not a comprehensive model. So what happened next? Einstein had a revised version of gravity, where mass is bending space-time. It's not really mass attracting mass. Is that literally when you have mass in the universe, it's bending the fabric of reality, and that brings things closer and farther away from things. The problem is that starting in 1933, Fritz Zwicky, who was an astronomer, he was looking at the Coma cluster of galaxies. And he said that based on the assumptions of gravity and Einstein's gravity, everything was way off. Basically, there was under 1% of the mass that should have been there in order for his observations to make sense. So instead of saying we should just question gravity, they said, no, we discovered dark matter. They plugged in dark matter and said, well, it must be there. And so there's this whole study now of dark matter. The problem is, I want to read you a direct quote, because it's so powerful, at least for me, is that in 2023, a group of physicists led by Pavel Krupa, he's a astrophysicist at the University of Bonn, he says they have falsified dark matter. And by the way, dark matter is supposed to make up about 25% of the universe. And if you combine dark matter and dark energy together make up 96% of the universe. That means, according to conventional physics, only 4% of the universe is understood. But I want to read you a quote from Pavel Krupa. Actually, this is a 2022 article. And he said, a simple test suggests that dark matter does not, in fact, exist. If it did, we would expect lighter galaxies orbiting heavier ones to be slowed down by dark matter particles, but we detect no such slowdown. The implications of this are nothing short of a revision of Einstein's theory of gravitation. Why the scientific community is in denial about the falsification of the dark matter model is a question that requires both a sociological and a philosophical explanation.
Right. So they just make these assertions. I mean, this is how this is why it's so, why I don't understand why questioning the universe is so controversial, why questioning NASA, why questioning any of this is so controversial, when throughout, I mean, just look at history, we know that, they would debunk themselves, right? They would say, or at least they claimed, they would say the Earth, the Earth is stationary and everything revolves around the Earth. And then they say, oh no, never mind. Everything's revolving around the sun. And then, at one point Pluto's a planet. Oh, never mind. Pluto's not a planet. It's like they keep coming up with they assert something, and then later on they say, okay, it no longer is that assertion. But anybody who questioned the assertion while it was an assertion is suddenly a lunatic or just anti-science. And it's like, well, eventually you're going to come around and say that none of this is, that what you just believed was not real. The dark matter issue is a significant issue because they've never been able to, I mean, they just claim that there's this matter that exists, but they don't know anything about it.
Right. And it's needed to prop up the entire cosmology. So think about how significant that is. If it's been falsified, whoa.
Right. And that's the problem. They don't want it falsified because it would disrupt all of the others. And then they have to start from square one again. And they don't want to have to do that.
I think so. Because all of a sudden, everything's on the table. If you have to rethink the basics of gravity and motion, we have to rethink the Big Bang. We have to rethink, like you said, what's known as geocentrism versus heliocentrism. Geocentrism is Earth is at the center. Heliocentrism is the current model that we revolve around the sun at the center. We have to rethink potentially the mechanics of Earth, the shape of Earth. All this stuff to me becomes fair game if the basics are wrong of cosmology.
So you're really exploring so that's like way bigger than just, oh, the moon landing is questionable, or whatever. And I always say, look, like I've always been interested in talking to people who believe the flat Earth theory. For example, people say, oh, how could you ever entertain that idea? I've never been out in my own spaceship and seen the Earth. I have to believe everything I believe when it comes to whether or not the Earth is round or what's out in space or any of this stuff. I just have to take it really on faith. I was just saying, well, it's a faith belief. I have to believe that the person isn't lying to me because I cannot verify for myself. So I don't believe anything unless I can verify it for myself. Which is most stuff. So most stuff I have to take on faith. That's just the reality of life, I think. Most things. I mean, I'm not going to take the time to go and become an astrophysicist. I'm not going to take the time to become a biologist. I'm not going to take the time, I'm not going to, throughout my life, be able to do all of these things. So a lot of it is just taken on faith and belief,
right.
Not on fact.
We are told to believe certain agencies, especially as it pertains to the things that are really high up and out there. We have to rely on a very small number of people. But even if and let me just add, if your audience is interested, you can find that so many of the images are CGI or composite that you see. They're not actually just an innocent image of what's actually there. And even in spite of that, we don't have many images that you'd expect. Let's say with regard to Earth's rotation and shape. It would be really nice to have continuous footage from space, seeing the full Earth, doing a full rotation as a sphere with no interruptions. And you'd want to see buildings standing upright on the top, because that's what we're told happens, and then upside down on the bottom, and then hanging sideways on the side all together. Instead, it's very often we have these snapshots, or even the pictures from the moon, which a lot of people question. We get a disc. We don't get a full sphere. We get a circle on a screen. So there's so many things we don't even have. Another one is it would be great to have a picture of Earth in the solar system with the sun and all the other planets in the correct order that we're told. Where's that? The actual visual images and video images, number one, they come from a small number of individuals. And number two, we don't have the ones that we'd even want.
So everything we see is CGI or like renderings.
Much of it is. Especially from NASA. So there was a big announcement. So in 1972, they say that was the last non-composite image from the moon. And there are others that have come out, but if you look into them, they're composites of various images put together. The blue marble, which was on the iPhone, and so it became very popular. There was a NASA artist who talked about this openly, that it was photoshopped and that it was his own rendition of what Earth would look like.
How do we not have imagery of this? I mean, we have all these guys, you got Elon Musk sending stuff out into space, like a freaking car is out there in space, zooming around. Like, why can't it turn around and take some images? I mean, we know they're sending rovers to Mars. That's far enough away, isn't it? To be able to actually look back at Earth and take the image of, I mean, it would be just a 24-hour image to see it completely revolving around.
Yeah, it's very curious to me too, because we do get these snapshots where you see part of Earth from above, but we don't have the full context. And we always have to basically do mental gymnastics to infer what the rest would be. But there's also issues with the lenses themselves. There's something called a fisheye lens, which can add curvature that doesn't
Right.
actually exist. So we have to know a lot of information about these images before we can draw conclusions.
Right. And that's what I think the very little research I've done on the flat earth theory is I know a lot of it hinges or not hinges, but a lot, but some, again, I haven't done any research onto it. So I don't actually know what the whole premise hinges on. But one of the aspects I should say is the fisheye lens that I've heard about is that's what's making things look like it curves rather than the reality. That's just a perception thing because of the lenses.
That's one piece that people look at. There's what I call in the book globe skepticism. I would call it distinct from flat earth, because flat earth proposes for sure earth is one way. But globe skepticism says we are told earth is a sphere, more specifically an oblate spheroid. So it's not perfectly spherical, basically a sphere with a radius value of roughly 4,000 miles. It's very specific. And many challenges to that model are looking at the radius value, for example. There are people who claim they can see things that should not be visible because these objects should be blocked by Earth's curvature, and yet they can see them. So that's something that should be replicated by a lot of people, including space agencies, because shouldn't you just take out a telescope and say, well, we know the math of Earth, this building should be blocked because it's way below the curve. Like if you were trying to see around a bend, for example, you wouldn't be able to see something because it's around the bend. So these are very easy experiments that people should be able to run. And then there are just so many anomalies with the globe that we could go into if you want, but that's often the challenge. And people will say, well, I'm not sure exactly what Earth is, but I know it's not a spinning globe. And this actually what initially got me interested. A man named Stephen A. Young, he wrote a book this year called A Fool's Wisdom. He's a theoretical physics PhD, and he came to the same conclusion where people were throwing around flat Earth, and he was like, nah, that can't be true. And he says, look, I don't know what Earth is, but the globe model has been falsified, basically.
That's interesting. I think that's a better way of phrasing it, is that it's skepticism. And that's what I say about the moon landing. I don't know if it happened or if it didn't happen, but I'm certainly not going to believe it just happened. I mean, I'm super skeptical. I don't know. I mean, it's possible it could have happened. Again, I don't know, but I also don't know if it did. And there's just enough evidence for me to question it and to think that there's just too. I would think that you would have guarded those tapes with your life. The greatest achievement of mankind, and you didn't guard those damn tapes. The greatest achievement of mankind, and I mean, and no other country's gone back. I mean, and the answer is, well, they didn't need to because we did it. Oh, okay. So that doesn't. They do everything. Everybody copies. Just because we did it, suddenly other nations don't say, oh, I don't need to do it now. I don't need to make a phone because they made the phone. So I don't need to make a phone. I mean, it's just like the most ridiculous idea to think, well, it's because we did it, so nobody else did. There's just so many questions around it. I think a good way to frame it is skepticism. And that's interesting that, okay, maybe, but have we not seen though pictures of other, isn't everything in space round that we know of, like Mars and Venus and Mercury?
Well, you're raising a very interesting point, because often we assume that if we see something out there a certain way, then we know what is going on where we live. And that presupposes that Earth, where we live, is like the things that we see in the sky. But what if Earth is distinct? So it doesn't tell us about Earth by looking at what's above. It's jumping to a false conclusion, or a conclusion that isn't warranted necessarily.
Well, I don't know if again, I don't know if we could jump to a conclusion because, again, unless I've gone out there with my own eyes and seen it for myself, it's not really a conclusion as much as it is a presumption. But I would think that I would think that it's more likely it's round if everything else around it is round also.
Well, I think that also runs into what's known as the Copernican principle, which Copernicus basically pushed the heliocentric model that the sun's at the center rather than Earth. And for the last several hundred years, we've been in that model. But the Copernican principle basically posits that Earth does not occupy a special place in the cosmos, that we're just one of many others. And in the book, I challenge that from many perspectives, including the cosmic microwave background. There's a lot of science that says, wait, maybe Earth does occupy a special place, in which case the notion that where we live is distinct from the lights that we see in the sky, that's more plausible to me. But also, I just think from a logical perspective, the analogy that's often given is that we don't necessarily know about the ceiling by studying, we don't know about the floor by studying the ceiling.
I mean, there is something that is very distinct about Earth that we don't have in the objects around us, and that's life, right? We have a very distinct ecosystem, a very distinct, life on Earth is very distinct and different. So I guess one could then come to the, possibility that Earth is different because
Right.
there are some real distinct differences already that we can observe. So
At
perhaps it
least
is different.
at least as a possibility. But one thought that comes to mind, Kim, is if Earth were a sphere, shouldn't it be really easy to just dig all the way down and then end out on the other side of space on the bottom? And so the problem is we've only been able to dig down under 8 miles. That's the farthest any digging expedition has gone. And the radius value is 4,000. If we went all the way, it would be over like roughly 8,000 miles. So
Hmm.
there are all these problems consistently. When I was trying to disprove what I was hearing of all the skeptics, and every time I'm like, well, I actually can't prove the current model. Another one that would be really nice is if we could freely and privately explore all of Earth. And one of the common objections is, well, since the 1959 Antarctic Treaty, which interestingly was signed by the US and the Soviet Union, among others, but the US and the Soviet Union were supposed to be in a Cold War. They also signed a space treaty, so that's interesting. But in any event, it restricts free and private access of Antarctica below the 60th south latitude. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean, some people go to parts of Antarctica, but we need to explore the whole thing to know exactly what it is, every part of it. And that's restricted. So we actually don't have the ability right now with our current knowledge to know what Earth is.
Well, and that's what I find so strange is even when I just love for fun, I go onto Google Maps or Apple Maps and I'll go to places in the world and do like street view walkthroughs or just to see what different places are like and all of this. And one thing that I find so strange is when I zoom out and I get the globe, I can spin the globe around, but you know what I can't do? I can't spin it upside down. I can't see all of Antarctica. It doesn't let me.
Mm-hmm.
It does. There's like as if satellites are like, how is that possible? Elon Musk has got Starlink, right? Just like gridded around the earth like a blanket. And yet, why do we not have imagery straight on of Antarctica? Why can I not spin the globe like that?
It's very interesting. And I want one other thing on Antarctica that really piqued my interest in this. There's something called magnetic declination. Basically, the magnetic poles of Earth don't match with the geographic poles. So the magnetic poles move around. And it's believed that that's the case because the magnetic field comes from Earth's core, which we've never been to. And it's
Right.
because of a geodynamo effect, which has never been replicated, of the outer core spinning a certain way. So basically, it's a guess about how Earth's magnetic field, such an important thing, even exists. The problem is that this has real world implications for navigation because we need compasses to get to the right geographic location.
Right.
We have to
Right.
manually adjust compasses, especially near Antarctica. It gets really, really bad. Where there's a website anyone can go to, magnetic-declination.com. You could see what the adjustment needed would be. And in Antarctica, at one point, like I quoted in my book, it's negative 178 degrees. So they're basically saying, whatever your compass is telling you, you have to turn around, then you get to the right place. It goes haywire. What's interesting is that if you took a flat map and put it around a sphere, you would have to really so the flat map, quote unquote, which again we can't know for sure, it says that Earth is a circle,
Hmm.
basically in a lake, surrounded by an ice wall, and that's Antarctica. So Antarctica is not a
Mm.
continent. That's the theory. Of course, we couldn't know this
Right.
for sure, but if you took
Right.
that
And
as
this is what
basically an
I've heard
approximate,
up from, yeah, I've heard this one from flat earth, from the flat earth, theory, which is that there's this, right, a giant ice wall. But then how do you
giant ice
get,
wall.
yeah, okay, keep going.
But let me continue, and then I'll pause. But what's
Okay.
interesting, if you just hold that as a possibility, if you were to take that quote unquote flat, circular Earth map and put it around a sphere, you'd have to really compress the outer parts, which is Antarctica, into this little ball at the bottom of the sphere. So it is interesting that the compasses go haywire, especially below the 60th south latitude, where we're not allowed to freely and privately explore. So there are these anomalies that are just interesting to me. Like also at the equator, which is where the two maps would most closely align, that's where you need the least amount of navigation adjustment on compasses for the magnetic field. So like these are things that we have to solve one way or the other, flat or not. Like why are the poles moving around like this? We don't understand it. And why do you have to manually adjust compasses to get to the right place?
And they just take it, like, what does a pilot say about that? I mean, do they just say, well, it is what it is? I don't know.
I
This
was
is just what
talking
I
to a
was
pilot.
taught.
Yeah, I was talking to a former pilot the other day who said, yeah, this is what we were taught. You just use these charts, you adjust because that's how it goes.
They say, hey, I don't know. This is what you do. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just what I'm told. All right, guys, we need to take a quick sponsor break. So let's get to it. Let me guess, your medicine cabinet is crammed with stuff that doesn't work. You still aren't sleeping. You still hurt. You're stressed out. That's how it was for me. So I cleared out my cabinet and reset my health with CBD from CB Distillery, and it's been a real change. CB Distillery's targeted formulations are made from the highest quality, clean ingredients, no fluff, no fillers, just pure, effective CBD solutions designed to help support your health. In 2 non-clinical surveys, 81% of customers experienced more calm, 80% said CBD helped with pain after physical activity, and an impressive 90% said they slept better with CBD. So if you struggle with a health concern and you haven't found relief, then make the change like I did to CB Distillery. And with over 2 million customers and a solid 100% money back guarantee, CB Distillery is the source to trust. And I have a 20% discount to get you started. All you have to do is visit cbdistillery.com, use code Kim for 20% off. That's cbdistillery.com, code Kim, cbdistillery.com. That's kind of the premise, I think, of life, right? Is we just are told things and then we say, okay, well, I guess that's just how it is. That's what I need to believe because they told me. And we do, and we don't even question it. I mean, that's how I think right now more people are I mean, I've always said question everything, but I certainly haven't always questioned everything. And I'm sure there's still a lot of stuff I don't question that I don't realize I don't question. And maybe 10 years from now, I'll be like, oh, I should have been questioning that thing that I wasn't questioning at all. But, you know, one of the things, for example, was I always questioned medicine and doctors, and I've always taken charge of my own health and always looked for second opinions or done my own research. But I will say that I really didn't question vaccines that much until the pandemic. You know, I wouldn't just take whatever they told me to take. And I've always been really hesitant whenever they wanted to jab something into my arm all of these years. But certainly the pandemic, I think, made a lot of us question a lot of things that was taken, especially when we saw them come down on us and say, this is the science and you're anti-science. And they were completely anti-science. And it was so obvious that they were anti-science, that they were literally denying the science, calling us anti-science. And I think that has opened up a lot of people's minds to being very open to, especially the things that you're questioning. Because now you're questioning things that I think prior to the pandemic, maybe you wouldn't have been able to get away with questioning this and be not viewed completely as a conspiracy theorist. Now people are like, you know what, I'm willing to listen to this because maybe you're on, because they've just been feeding us so much bullshit and we're expected to believe it. And now when you say, yeah, but guys, have you ever just stopped to question this? And then the pilots are like, well, no, I just was taught this, so I do it. And, I do get from point A to point B. So I guess it works.
Yeah, I wasn't questioning this certainly several years ago. Same as you. I wasn't questioning vaccines in the same way that I do now. So COVID definitely opened people's minds. And what I like to do is ask the question, how is it that I know the thing that I think I know? What are the assumptions baked in? And every time I end up doing this, I realize that the assumptions are very flimsy, whether it's viruses, whether it's shape of the earth. And then the more I look into it, I realize, wow, there's a ton of evidence. I'll give one example that really blew me away. Before I even knew I was going to write this book on cosmology, I was traveling abroad and I ended up at this luncheon sitting next to a former pilot who started talking about cosmology. And he was like, yeah, I don't think Earth is a spinning globe. I had never had to adjust for Earth's curvature or motion. And I used to teach other pilots, and I never taught them to adjust for that sort of thing. And he said, most pilots do believe that Earth is a spinning globe, but there's a small percentage of us that know it's not. And it has to do with the way the gyroscopes work. He was explaining the technicalities of it. And he's like, yep, it's not. So there is stuff out there. I think once we open our minds, like it seems to me the evidence or the breadcrumbs start to come.
Although, I still assume the Earth is a globe, and because especially if you travel, if you travel like from LA to Europe, they'll take you on this weird journey, and if you look at it from a flat map, when you're looking at the flight path, you're like, why are they going way up to Canada and over Iceland, in order to get over to this other spot that seems like it would just be a straight line. But their answer is, well, the curvature of the Earth, and that's why we go in this, because this is actually the shorter distance. Yes, on a map, it looks like a straight line is the shorter distance, but because that's the fatter part of the Earth, that's actually a further distance. And if we go around, if we cut around the curve, then we get there faster. I mean, that to me then is evidence that the Earth is curved.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard debates on both sides of this. There's some people that look at emergency landings of airplanes and the paths they take, they claim, don't align with the globe at all, and they work much better on a flat map. But again, we run into problems because there isn't a flat map that we can say is true with conclusive certainty. We can have maybe a general framework for it, but we don't
Right.
have an ability to map out every part of Earth. Even the North Pole, there are some restrictions in terms of what we can know.
Hmm. So it might be like a spinning top, rather than a globe or flat. It could be, there
Well, it's
could
interesting.
be
If
a
we start
giant. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, if we get really metaphysical, this is, I started with the nature of consciousness, the nature of reality. What's matter? Because Earth is supposed to be a solid thing, whatever shape it is. But what if the notion of something solid isn't what we think? And that raises all kinds of questions. So I think the notion of flat or globe is perhaps a false dichotomy that gets us really stuck into
Yeah.
Keeps us away from other possibilities that we might just not even be aware of.
Right, right. And I think that's the thing. So, and that's an important point, I think, to bring up, which is it's not one or the other. There could be something completely different that we're not even thinking about or even capable of thinking about in understanding it. And I always say that about astrology. I've studied astrology for so long, horoscopes, not like the daily horoscope that you read in the back of the magazine, but why is it for the longest time I could guess. I haven't been able to do it in a while because I don't read up on astrology enough, like the signs, the different personality traits of signs. But I used to be so good at it that I was the party trick in college. I could go to a party and my friends would say, "Kim, do it, do it, do it." Like, go, guess a sign, guess a sign. And I could talk to somebody for 5, 10 minutes and guess their sign with about a 95% accuracy. And people would be blown
Whoa.
away. They'd say, "I don't believe in any of that stuff. I don't know," and then I would just ask them a couple of questions, and sure enough, I'd be able to guess their sign. And they'd be blown away. And they're like, "Oh, that was just a lucky guess." But then I would do it to their friend, and then their minds would be totally blown. And I would always my answer to it was, look, I don't know. I, I understand that they have not been able to empirically study astrology. So it's considered phooey, right? They're like, "Oh, that's just some sort of weird, strange metaphysical." Same thing with like visitations from spirits or seeing ghosts or things. These are things that are just viewed as, oh, that's just mind tricks and mind stuff because we haven't been able to and all I say is, look, we just haven't been able, we're not smart enough yet to figure out how to empirically study these things. But just because we haven't been able to figure out how to empirically study doesn't mean that they're not empirically studyable. And it doesn't prove that they don't exist and that these things aren't true concepts that work. You just haven't figured out. You're just not smart enough yet. None of us are to figure out the method to empirically study them. So a lot of people
Yeah,
just
I think
discount things.
I completely agree with you. And I've actually seen this dynamic a lot because I'm on the board of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where our scientists are studying the nature of consciousness, psychic phenomena, channeling, mediumship, spirits, all these things that are supposed to be crazy, but using the scientific method. One of the biggest problems is a lack of funding for this stuff. So you get a
Yeah.
skeptic who says, look, there aren't that many papers. Well, yeah, because how much funding goes toward this? And it's very difficult for scientists to leave academia. Well, often they have to leave academia to study things like this because of the taboo. So you end up with these dynamics that make it very difficult. And you're reminding me of a quote from a neuroscientist named Mario Beauregard. He said in an interview a few years ago that he was told by the head of a top neurological institute in Canada that as long as this person was the head of the institute, that he would not be able to study spiritual phenomena there.
I mean, isn't that so bizarre? What is it, do you think, that's stopping people? What do you think is that? Do you think there's like a nefarious agenda behind these types of, like, from everything that you've been studying with them just questioning or not questioning, but them just taking ideas at face value, they being collectively, experts in every field. Do you think it's ignorance? Do you think it's nefarious? Do you think it's just, I mean, for, a lot of things, like when it comes to space, I think a lot of religions didn't want us studying things. They don't want us to know things that are going to disprove religion or even prove religion, depending on which side of whatever you're on, right? There's so many people that have these agendas and they don't want their power taken away, whatever the power is or who's in power.
Yeah, well, what Dr. Beauregard, the man I told the story about at the Neurological Institute, his conclusion was that it's social engineering. He said it's clearly social engineering, that
Yeah.
there's some desire to make the population believe certain things about the nature of reality. And I feel like I've almost been forced into agreeing with him based on everything I've looked at, all the topics you mentioned. It doesn't seem innocent. And I do think there could be some people who are innocently propagating a narrative and believe they're doing the right thing because they haven't examined the presuppositions that they're using. But there's something somewhere, I don't know how it works. I think it's probably multidimensional, where we're being steered in a way that's away from the truth. And I call it in my books a spiritual war. I can't come away with any other conclusion that it's multidimensional, dark versus light. It gets into religious and spiritual concepts that have been talked about for a long time. To me, it's the most parsimonious explanation I can come up with right now.
So you think it's like evil, like there's an evil force essentially that must be out there trying to lead us astray.
Yes, and I think it's way more evil than most people can comprehend. And I go into this in some of the books, some of the gory details of what this force might be, and it can manifest in very deceptive ways. So it can be a wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak.
Well, that would be like the devil. I mean, the concept of devil, right? The concept of the devil is like the most evil possible entity ever, and way more evil than people can really, truly, fully comprehend. Would be the idea.
Yeah, that's where I'm landing. But it can manifest as, well, we just want to help you. We're doing this to be compassionate. That kind of narrative, where it's a deceptive, like you said, deceptive way of doing
It's trickery. I mean, how else is he going to do it? He's not going to say, hey, I'm evil, so come follow the evil way. It's got to be, no, you're doing the right thing, but you're helping people, and, you're helping people unleash their sexuality and live their best sexual lives by propagating porn and putting it out there to everybody and making, and getting people addicted to it and ruining their marriages and their lives and their, it's like, like these, but that's actually like a more nefarious example of it. There's a lot of like climate change, right? Well, you got to do what you got to do for carbon footprint, and you're saving lives. Or even COVID pandemic. Oh, you're saving grandma's life if you lock down and take the jab and give up all your liberties, right? You're saving people. It's always under the guise of you're helping.
No, exactly. And this was a big part of my book on the Great Reset, where I talk about how caring people who have actually good intentions can be fooled into supporting causes that are objectively harmful. It's like, oh, you have to save the climate, and therefore you should restrict your freedom to do so.
Right.
Whatever it is, there's always some restriction in order to, it's for the greater good.
So have you always been religious? Did you go into this? Are you religious, would you say? I mean, if you think it's the concept, if it's something evil that is nefarious, that is pulling us in this direction, what got you to that?
I've come a long way from where I was, because let's say starting 2016, when I was researching initially, I was atheist, agnostic. I believed very firmly that when you die, that's the end of your consciousness. There's no afterlife, and that the universe is fundamentally random and meaningless. And I thought we could create meaning in our lives, but any meaning we created was ultimately a rationalization, but that there wasn't meaning built into the fabric of reality itself. I was fully there. And the more I learned from mainstream science, it pushed me there more and more. So I had this big flip in 2016 that led me to start writing, because I'm like, I was so disoriented, because I didn't know what the answer was, but I was at least questioning those assumptions. Now, when I look at spiritual and religious traditions all over the world, I say this very much aligns with everything I'm studying. I don't know if I pick one or the other, but many of the general principles, whether it's good and evil, whether it's afterlife, I talk a lot about the science of reincarnation, all that stuff I'm very open to.
So you don't have like a particular religion?
No.
But you just think, do you believe in God?
I think it depends on how we define God. I mean, to me, I would say my general metaphysics for the nature of reality is that we live in some kind of unified field of consciousness, and that we're all individuations of consciousness, but we're interconnected in some way. The best analogy I've come across is Bernardo Kastrup's analogy. He says it's like an infinite stream of water, where water is analogous to consciousness. Each of us is a whirlpool within the stream. And so we feel like we're individuals, but we're interconnected. And the full stream of consciousness, to me, maybe that's what some people call God. I wouldn't view it as a separate entity that I would point to. I would call it maybe the substrate of all reality, the intelligence that we're all a part of. You could call that God.
I totally agree with you. I mean, that's where I'm at with it right now. I used to be a really religious person. I grew up so confused. I grew up Catholic on my dad's side. My family's Catholic on the Iversen side. then on my mom's side, she's Vietnamese, so they're Buddhist. And I was taught both growing up. And then I converted when I was 15 to Mormonism. I was like, okay, totally confused. So now I'm just going to go become a Mormon because then I can make sense of something. And then I left Mormonism after 15 years of being a very practicing Mormon, graduated from seminary, did a lot of stuff. And now, as I've gone through more of that journey, have you ever read the book Many Lives, Many Masters?
Yes.
That's a really great book. What do you think of that? Because that's where I ended up with this. Yeah, I think it's not just that book. There've been many others and other stories of people that have gone into deep hypnosis, been able to kind of reconnect with the previous realm or and the in-between realm. They've connected with their previous lives and also the in-between realm. And they all come away. What I've noticed with a lot of these books and a lot of these stories of people who've died and then they've come back kind of a thing, like near-death experiences, is a lot of them have a very similar feeling when they die, which is this embracing of an entity as a whole and no judgment. It's like we are one, like we're part of one energy, we're one force. And the question often that many of them say that they were asked when they finally went to wherever it was, so what did you learn? It was like
Mm-hmm.
what knowledge are you coming back with? Rather than, oh, wow, you're being judged for all the bad things you did and you did all these good deeds, so now you're going to be elevated or something. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, on Many Lives, Many Masters? Such a great book.
Yeah, it is a great book. Definitely recommended. I read that early in my journey, probably in 2016, 2017. And this is Dr. Brian Weiss, who's a highly credentialed doctor who started using hypnosis to help people recall alleged previous lives and even a period between lives. I know some people object to hypnosis, so I will give some evidence that to me is even more compelling. And it's research that's been led by the University of Virginia at their Division of Perceptual Studies at the med school since the 1960s, looking at young children, usually between the ages of 2 and 6 years old, who start speaking about a life that is not their own. And the researchers do the heavy lifting to find historical records to see if they can match what the kid is saying. And sometimes the children have birthmarks or physical defects in their physical body that align with the way they claim they died in the previous life. And the researchers sometimes find medical records that validate what the kids say. In a subset of these cases, the children talk about intermission memories, a period between lives where they chose parents. And this University of Virginia studying this, Dr. Ian Stevenson, Dr. Jim Tucker, and their colleagues, Ed Kelly, Bruce Grayson, very credentialed academics, looking at this and saying, well, how else can we explain the data here other than to say maybe something's going on with our consciousness that we don't accept in mainstream science?
Mm-hmm. So fascinating. I have a friend that has a little girl that for the longest time, I mean, the minute she could speak, she insisted her name was not her name. It was like, and I mean, for years, she has insisted they would call her, I don't even remember what her actual name was, but she's like, I'm Maggie. Like, why do you keep calling me this other name? I'm Maggie. And she just kept insisting on this. And they were like, okay, we don't even know where she got that name. Like it was a name from the moment she could talk. She was just like, and insistent, very angrily insisting, that is not my name. Like, stop calling me this other name. That is not who I am. Like she had a memory of where she had just come from, like from the previous life. I mean, it was just the most insane. I mean, it was really fascinating, but it made me think when my friend would talk about it, like, I don't know, she just got this idea. And I'm sitting there thinking, that's probably a past life that she's just because I'd read these books and all these studies that these scientists have done. And it's just so fascinating. It is fascinating. So so then you think that there's maybe this other evil force that, do you have an idea of what you think what the purpose is of? I mean, is that, because if we're like this energy, that's the only way I could really describe it, that we are collectively an energy together and that we then come down and have these experiences and we get reincarnated as consciousness. We're like this consciousness energy together. Then what is the purpose of the evil?
Mm-hmm.
Does it have a purpose? Is it just there?
It's such a good question. And I think about this all the time. One of the common answers I hear and think about myself is that all evil or darkness ultimately stimulates evolution in some way and stimulates growth. So I think about it because I was a competitive athlete growing up, played tennis in college, and it was very painful to train and
Yeah.
working out in the gym and spending all the hours practicing, but it made me a better tennis player. There was a lot of suffering, but I did improve and evolve. So some would say that the evil is there to stimulate our growth. We could even look at the COVID
Right.
era starting in 2020. Now we're all open to, many of us are open to things we would not have been open to before. And there were a lot of bad things that happened in that period too. So the argument often is that it's difficult for us to comprehend this or even accept it because we look at it from a human lens. And when we see suffering, we only see it from the way the human can see it. And it's a limited perspective. But if we had a helicopter's view looking down, we'd see the bigger picture. That's the argument. I don't know, because there's a lot of suffering that sometimes is hard to rationalize and say, like,
Yeah.
could that really be for growth? I don't know.
It's the only thing that gives me comfort is thinking that there is this place that we recycle to. And then, just with the stories. And again, if anybody hasn't ever read Many Lives, Many Masters, I think it's a good starting point. And then there's probably many other places you could go after reading that book. I just think it's such a simple and interesting book to read to start off getting into that idea, the concept of this, and even of reincarnation. It's such science, the guy is a well-known scientist and very credentialed, as you mentioned. But yeah, I think it's just such a, well, I don't even know where I was going with that. I just think it's so fascinating that that's what we go back into, and it's comforting to know. And I guess it's the only thing that gives me comfort when I see all of the tragedy that goes on in the world and the death. And to me, death is not the worst thing that can happen to you, right? It's the suffering. And then the death, because if you go back into this consciousness and you get recycled into this, then it's from what everybody's described, it's very peaceful and it's a very loving place. So it's a good place to go. And then you can choose again which life you want, if you want to experience something else again. And then I always think, well, who chose to go to these treacherous places and live that life and be abused and oppressed and enslaved? But I mean, that's part of the growth, and maybe we all have to go through that at some point in the cycle. I don't know if I'm making any sense. It's hard to have these conversations.
Well, you're raising a lot of important points. One of which is that, first of all, the vast majority of these near-death experience cases are positive, but a minority are hellish. So I'm having more and more trouble generalizing, like, what is it different for every person? How do we know what's what in these other realms? And then also, if we're dealing with a multidimensional reality that people describe, so a near-death experience, to take a few steps back, is when a person is in some kind of major physiological trauma, so cardiac arrest, the person's clinically dead. And then they say that their consciousness was in a place that was realer than real. And they had 360-degree vision and all sorts of very mystical things. And often they were immersed in unconditional love, and they talk about going home. And it was a very positive thing. That it could be that that's just objectively true for most people, and maybe the hellish ones, they're just anomalies. I don't know. But then even in these other realms where it's positive, how do we know what's what? How do we know what's not deception? How do we, if we encounter entities, people encounter a being of light or deceased relatives, just because I studied the contact phenomenon in and end to upside down contact, what John Mack said, who was the head of psychiatry at Harvard, Pulitzer Prize winner, late in his career, he started to study what are known as alien abductions. I know it sounds insane, but he was convinced that something was going on. It had to do with consciousness. He was very into consciousness. But he said the alien beings, whatever that means, appear to be consummate shapeshifters, meaning they have an ability to shift their form. And to me, that opens a can of worms because we don't know what to trust, especially in other, where it's more of a trippy realm.
Well, a lot of people think when we die, our brain dies slower, right? And it plays tricks on us while we die because we only use a certain percentage of our brain. The rest of it's kind of an anomaly. And maybe the rest of it, we dream, for example. We know that we go into sleep and we have visions of other worlds and other things, and things are strange. And so people think that it's like the dream state comes forward and it looks more real. And it's not real. None of it's real. It's just the dream state. It's just what our brain does. Dreaming to me is also very bizarre. Like, why does our brain even do that?
Yeah. well, there's some big questions embedded in what you're describing, because you're asking the question, is the brain creating those experiences, basically?
Yeah.
But the question, especially as it pertains to near-death experience, is that often the brain is not in a state that's capable of producing such perceptions. So when I interviewed Dr. Bruce Grayson from UVA, this is for my podcast series, Where's My Mind? He said to me, we're left with this paradox that at a time when the brain isn't functioning, the mind is functioning better than ever. And the idea is that the brain is actually perhaps an interface for consciousness and even getting in the way of a broader reality, where when we knock out the brain fully, that reality becomes much more exposed to us. Meaning the brain is actually not creating the experience, but rather getting the brain out of the way is what allows us to have the experience.
It's possible none of this is real. I mean, right? I mean, it's possible none of this is real. It's possible that the reason why we can't see, why we make up ideas about, why scientists make up ideas about dark matter and why we can't see Antarctica fully, or why we have to, I mean, it's possible that we are living in some bizarre, different reality, a different consciousness. I mean, all of that's possible. People might scoff at this, right? And think, oh, now you're really losing it, Kim. But this is actually a possibility. I mean, it's a real possibility that we're in some other place. And that dreaming, for example, like you're mentioning, is bringing forward more reality than what we realize. And we have collectively or even individually, I don't know if you're real. I mean, that's just the reality of it, right? I don't know if any of this is real. Does that sound crazy?
No, I'm landing there too. I'm just increasingly skeptical of what I thought must have been true because I don't know with certainty and I can't verify. I mean, if I wanted to be the biggest skeptic, I always say this, that the only thing I know with any certainty is that right now it feels like I'm having a conscious experience.
Right.
Everything else is some form of inference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the only thing we can really know.
Yeah, even the past. If I think about a minute ago, it's a memory that occurs in my consciousness right now.
Right. But you don't even really know if it's the past. And that's where things get really screwy. Yeah, I mean, people might, okay, so let me just explain why, well, from a scientific perspective, why that might be a real reality. When I was studying philosophy, I took a class on time and space. And if anybody ever studies time and space from a philosophical mix with physics perspective, that's the one class you walk out of realizing you know nothing. I mean, every other class you learn something. You go to that class and you come out and you're like, oh, wow, I don't know anything about anything. Like everything that I've been taught, everything that we think is perception, is like everything we thought was real is actually maybe a perception, and the perception might not be real at all. And one thing is this concept that you brought up really early on, which is the bending of, right? You have to, you get into these scientific concepts of space bending, and even things could bend. So, and these are like real scientific concepts. These are not philosophical concepts. These are science concepts that then for philosophy, they brought it into what does this mean then? If we can bend space, and if the past is actually the future, the present is actually the past, you're experiencing things in an order you think are linear, but in reality, none of it's actually linear. You're actually you think it's linear. Your experience registers it as linear, but you're actually experiencing everything. Like the event, it's so difficult to explain. You could probably explain it better than I can.
Well, I agree with you that linear time, that time goes from past to present to future, it is ultimately inference, like that sequence. And then we get into deeper questions of, is space-time even real, or is it an abstraction? I mean, Donald Hoffman, a credentialed scientist, he's saying space-time is dead. And then we create basically an entire physics and Einstein's gravity, the bending of space-time, based on these concepts, really, that are very abstract.
Right. And then ultimately, if they're real, then yeah, a lot of things are really bizarre. Things get really, really bizarre. And I think the more people study that type of stuff, the more they realize how bizarre things are. I'm under the opinion that most people, I don't think that there's a nefarious agenda behind most people believing everything they've been taught. I think most people just, like if I bring up something, well, like the moon landing, or, if we were to talk about, like, if I were to say to somebody, well, the earth being round, or is it maybe a different shape or whatever, they're automatically going to get defensive and say, well, of course it's round, or like, of course we landed on the moon, or of course, this, that, and the other. And you say, well, how do you know? They just, oh, don't be ridiculous. That's usually kind of the default response, is very, very aggressive. It's not giving actual. There are some, though, that will take the time, because I think their brains work very similarly, and they will give you an actual, well, because we have this or we have this. They'll give you kind of a logical answer as to why they're then inferring that the earth is in fact round, or that we in fact did land on the moon, or that there's in fact, whatever these things are, right? Or that viruses exist, or in fact, blah, 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 in their mind, in fact, when there's actually no fact. um, but I think most people are just good people that just believe, and they were taught something, and they're taught it by experts. And so they're just saying, well, the expert taught me, so that's what it is, because the expert's the expert and you're not.
Yeah, and it's also very disconcerting to start to think that what the experts tell us is not correct, because then we have to
Right.
question many assumptions about our existence. And I can understand, because of my own process, how disorienting it was to shift from one worldview to the new one. That was not easy or comfortable. It's easier sometimes to just stick in our little shell. And I'm reminded of one of my good buddies said to me when I wrote my first book, talking all about the evidence of past lives and near-death experiences and psychic phenomenon. He's looking at it and said, Mark, there might be some real credence to what you're saying, but my life's good as is, and I don't want to rock the boat, so I'm not going to go into this.
Yeah. I just look at even just myself, and I remember, I don't know, maybe it was 15 years ago or so, an athlete, a prominent athlete. I don't know who it was. People watching remember this, but I think it was a basketball player, and he was on a podcast, and he said he basically denied the moon landing. He was like, I don't believe we landed on the moon. And I mean, he was eviscerated by the media. I mean, people were like, can you believe he said that? I mean, it was like, just really eviscerated. Oh my gosh, he's a moon landing denier. And I was one of those people. I mean, at the time I was doing a radio show on the FM dial. I was a syndicated radio talk show host. And I think I was even one that was like, can you believe that this guy said the moon landing didn't happen? And when I thought about it, well, how do I know it happened? It's like I never took the time to stop and question it. I just automatically ridiculed this person who questioned it without even thinking about why I was ridiculing the person who questioned it. I ridiculed him because all of society said that this event happened. So therefore I have to believe it. And now that I question it, I get ridiculed, but I don't care, because more people question it. I can't even live stream from Los Angeles. How in the hell did they live stream from the moon in the 1960s? I have hard times with that here now in 2024, Have you written a book on the afterlife? Is that what the Contact one is about?
I talk about it in my first book, and End Upside Down Thinking. There's a lot on the afterlife and mediumship, because it all pertains to the nature of consciousness, and whether consciousness comes from the brain, or if consciousness can exist when the brain stops functioning. So that was core to my initial exploration, and it bleeds into everything else.
Yeah. So fascinating. Mark, this has been we just barely scratched the surface of everything, and I know it kind of went all over the place, but I wasn't really sure. I mean, you're just so fascinating, and you've written all these books, and you cover so many different topics. I don't even know, you're a difficult one to under. I mean, I don't even know how to phrase it. Like, you're a difficult one to understand or to encapsulate into a short conversation, because there's so much. You said you did this podcast, Where Is My Mind? And this was like an 8-part series that you did in 2019. Why don't you do more of these you've written these books, so why not do more of these? Because like I said, I can't do this in 1 hour with you.
Yeah. Well, I've been very busy writing books since that came out in 2019. So maybe I will. And it's also a difficult thing to produce. I was very lucky to work with Blue Duck Media, based in LA, and they're very good they usually do sports podcasts. So they said, Mark, we're going to take this abstract concept. You go out and interview all these people and scientists and near-death experience survivors, and then we're going to take clips of those interviews and put them into a narrative conversation. So the episodes are like 30 to 45 minutes each, and only 8 of them, so people can binge it, versus long-form interviews. We did it. We did that one. It took a lot of time and effort. I'm glad we did. And I'm glad that you just nudged me, because maybe I should do more.
Yeah, I think you should. I think that you've got to break these concepts down. I think the biggest thing to take away, now people can walk away from this, and I think my point of wanting to talk to you and have this conversation is to get people to just question. You don't have to believe what you believe or what I believe or your conclusion or my conclusion or even if it's not, I don't really feel like I have conclusions on things. I say that I just have like things I think in the moment, right? Like uh it's my thought for now, and it can always change as more information comes in, rather than just a decisive conclusion. Like, yes, the earth must be round. I don't know really. So that's what I want people to walk away from, is you could think that you believe the earth is round, for example, but be open to the new information. Always be open to the new information that comes in, and be willing to question the information that exists to allow for new information to come in. The fact that people don't question is why we don't end up with new information at all, because they don't want to find the new information, right?
So the dedication of my book, An End to the Upside Down Cosmos, is to those who are comfortable with three important words: I don't know. And that's really what I'm trying to encourage, because often what happens is, we see this with viruses, cosmology, other things, where we can show very conclusively that there's a lot of evidence to believe that the current picture, as exactly as it's presented, that there's something wrong with it. But people will often say, well, if you can't tell me conclusively what the alternative is, then I'm just going to stick with the current idea. And the analogy I give in my book is, imagine a teacher gives us a multiple choice test, and they say, Mark and Kim, you need to give me one answer. It's either A, B, C, or D. And you come to me and say, Mark, I really think it's A. And I say, Kim, I don't agree. I spent a week on this, and I can just show you A is not right. And then you say to me, Mark, do you know if it's B, C, or D? And I say, well, I don't. I have to do a lot more study. I'm not sure. And then you say, okay, we have to go with A then. And that is the thinking that pervades so much of modern society.
Yeah. And I think you and I are walking away with, we don't know anything. I think that's kind of, and that's why when I started looking into it, and I was like, oh, this is, you and I are like twin spirits or something, because, and I'm sure there's many more of us. So it's not just twins. I'm sure there's a whole grouping of us, but it's those of us that say, yeah, we just really don't know anything. And we have to be willing to question all of it, but it's a hard place to be, because I do find it quite confusing to live in this realm of, I just don't know. I just don't know. I know that that's probably, like, to just kind of say, well, I know what you know is probably not it, because you're not really asking all the questions, but it could be it. You're just not getting enough information to convince me. It's just such an abstract conversation to have. This is why, I loved studying philosophy. I also hated it. In the end, it's like, well, what did I learn when I came out of college? I don't know. I learned that I don't know anything in the
I do think
end.
there are benefits, though. I found there's a loosening of the rigidity I used to have, and it's led to a
Yeah.
smoother and happier life, I would say, and a more liberated life.
You think so? I mean, how could that be? I almost feel like I just envy people that, no, I don't think that's right. I think we're worse off, Mark. I think we're worse off, because I look at people that just have their dogma, and they just, they live and die by that dogma, and as long as they follow what they believe is right, they're happy. I don't know. I think ignorance is bliss in that way. Not ignorance in our way of we know we're ignorant. Like, we know we don't know. But they think they know, and they're ignorant to the fact that they don't, and I think they're blissful.
Well,
I
from
don't know.
my
That's
own
what.
experience, it's been liberating. I can only speak for
Okay.
myself, because when I was more rigid, I don't think I was as happy. I didn't have a compass for living, or really a sense of purpose, or a reason to want to question things. And as I've started to shed my rigidity in so many areas, each time I feel freer in a way that I can't explain. Even the cosmology
Yeah.
book, that's been the biggest impact on me. Like, why would cosmology make you feel freer? It's like, wow, maybe, Kim, there's a part of us that knows when we're believing a falsehood. And there's a little bit of just dis-ease or discomfort that we can't put our finger on until we start to shed those falsehoods.
Well, I wish I had that experience. I think for me, I'm just way more confused and way more lost than I think it was easier for me to just be religious. I think that's what I'm coming at it from. Back when I was really religious, I was happier because it was easier. It was easier to be like, this is just the way that it is. Until I started looking at it and being like, yeah, I don't know, but it can't possibly be, because that's not actually making sense anymore. And then when it stopped making sense, I started to then question more. I feel like it was just so much easier to have, like, this is just what you need to do to go to heaven. And then just do these things and you go to heaven. I was like, okay, that's easier. I don't know. So fascinating, Mark. Are you coming out with are you writing another one now? What are you doing?
I don't know what I'm doing next. I'm trying to take a breather after the cosmology book came out. And I always say this after I write a book, that it might be my last one, because I would have to find a topic that really is that paradigm shifting for me, that I feel so passionate to go through the whole book writing process on. So I don't know if or what that will be.
Okay, so if you're not writing a book right now, let's get you back on a podcast. Do podcast, get these going in audio form so that we can listen to them and realize how confused we are. But you're right. I mean, there is an element of awakening to understanding how confused we are, right? I mean, that's what many people saw during the pandemic, is realizing how we had been lied to. We were all confused. We were all just believing things. And actually waking up from that has been very liberating. So I do agree. There is a sense of liberation that comes from recognizing that it's all a bunch of bull. And then when we recognize that and we say, well, then what isn't the bull? Let's separate the bull from the non-bull, and let's like kind of parse through this together. That is a very liberating experience. Ultimately, I do agree with that. And so I think, people do need to be liberated from that dogmatic thinking. It can be very liberating for a lot of people. And that's why I think you should maybe put all of these into a more digestible form, audio, the books plus, because then you could have more conversation and elaborate on them as well when you do the podcast. Just an idea. Anyway, something to think about. All right, Mark, so I've got a link down below to your books so people could start buying these and reading them. They do seem to be quick reads. So people should be able to read them, think about them, ponder them, and move on to the next one, and open up their eyes and their minds, more importantly. So is there anything else anywhere else we should direct people besides we've got the Where's My Mind podcast link down below in your books?
Yeah, my website, it's just my name, markgober.com, markgober.com. And I would just add that all of my books are on Audible. I read the Audible myself because I know some people prefer that, but it's also, they're on Kindle and hard copy too.
Great. Perfect. So they can hear it if they want to. So it's not just like me pushing you towards a podcast. But Mark, thank you for this conversation. I know it's a confusing one. I hope that I didn't confuse everybody with this conversation in the audience. I'll get the emails, so I'll find out. And if it was too confusing, then I'll have you back in the future and we'll narrow it down. What might happen is a lot of people email and say, Kim, just stick to this one particular aspect and dive into that with Mark rather than this kind of overview. But I wanted to have the overview first. And then maybe next time we'll come back and do more of a deep dive into one aspect of this. I think the liberty one would be very interesting to talk about, especially as here we are, we're in a political mess. We've got a lot of questions on how do we move forward in society, and the liberty question. And I think, but looking at it from such a unique angle, rather than just having this, well, I think it should be this way or that way, like the left and the right, let's break it down from a whole different way. I think that's so fascinating. So Mark, thank you again for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kim. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope your audience enjoys it.
Thank you. All right, guys, that is it for tonight's show. I am curious to hear from you what you thought of that conversation. I did feel like it was a bit all over the place, and I apologize for that. I feel like maybe I could have narrowed it down a little bit better. It's just such an abstract concept, what Mark said. He's not one of those guys where he's like, oh, I firmly believe in flat Earth, or no moon landing, or I firmly believe in viruses don't exist. I mean, we've had a lot of those types of guests on who have firm beliefs, and then they're here to tell us what those beliefs are. But in Mark's case, he's such a consciousness guy. Like, that's his fundamental area of study, is really consciousness and questioning all of the things that we have been taught and just breaking them down and saying, well, that can't, why, if this is true, why can they not explain this? Or if this is true, why can they not explain that? It's not necessarily coming from the realm of, I'm going to disprove everything around me because I have this certain belief. It's more abstract than that. And that's why the conversation, I felt like, was a bit all over the place. Sorry about that. But hopefully I'll bring them back and we can maybe get into, individual things. Let me know what your thoughts are. I know you guys will. So just email me, kim@kimiversen.com. Tell me what you think. Did I just totally flub this one and fail? That's kind of how I feel because it was so abstract. I just don't know if we got anywhere with it. But email me anyway. I'm going to rest this weekend and think about it. This is the type of stuff, though, that where my brain and my life has sort of been heading is what Mark has been studying and focusing on. I brought this up on the show before that, I'm feeling, I'm just not feeling settled with how I've been approaching subjects, the subjects that we cover on this show, the world, politics, everything that's going on. I am not settled. I'm unhappy with, I'm not an unhappy person. I don't want you guys to think I'm unhappy. I'm not unhappy, but I'm unhappy with the direction, and I've been looking for a way to change. I've been looking for a path, and I haven't been sure what that is, and I still don't really quite know, but I think talking to Mark, I'm a little closer to the path that I think we need to go down, because here's the reality. We're not solving anything with politics. We're just not. We're getting, two cheeks of the same ass when it comes to Democrats, Republican. We're all being ushered back into red party, blue party. We have these moments of there's potentially an independence, like with Bernie Sanders, there was a moment of that. And then he went full flock right into the Democrats. There was a moment with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and he folded back into Republicans. And so is Donald Trump in a lot of ways. And which I know some of you are going to get mad at me and I'm going to get emails about that. But we're not solving problems anymore or ever. Maybe we never have, but we're not solving problems. And that is weighing on me a lot more lately. And I've been thinking about everything. I've been questioning my doing this, what I'm doing, how I'm doing this. I'm questioning all of it. And I'm going through this process, and I appreciate you guys bearing with me through that process. And in the meantime, I've been kind of doing the same. I've been kind of just doing the show as we've always done it. I've been doing the same thing I've been doing in order, just because for one, I need to, I want to do a show every day, but also I haven't made up my mind on exactly what I'm going to do differently or how I'm going to even approach things differently. But that's just the inner struggle I'm going with and that I'm going through. And Mark is, I think, showcasing the path that I actually want to go. I want to kind of tap more into that philosophical, the bigger questions. Who are we? Where are we from? Why are we here? How do we solve problems from that perspective rather than relying on politics? Anyway, that's where I'm at. Sorry to ramble on. I'll let you get on with your weekend. Thank you guys so much for being here. I hope you have a great weekend. I'll see you Monday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Until then, guys, rest, relax, rejuvenate. That is what I'm going to be doing. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.